Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today we're adding to the list of Final Fantasy XI history videos ahead of the Final Fantasy XI themed raid in Final Fantasy XIV, Echoes of Vana'diel. I've already released videos detailing the Shadow Lord, Fafnir, Prish, and Juno. 3 of these are bosses in the upcoming raid as per the most recent trailer, while the other is the location of the first raid, kind of. However, the trailer revealed one of the remaining unknown bosses, and it came as a huge surprise to me and probably many other Final Fantasy XI fans. It's none other than the Archangels. Not only are these characters going to feature as bosses inside of this raid, but the gear reward is actually versions of their armor. Of course, it's going to be dyeable, and there are a lot of sets that Final Fantasy XI players wanted to see put into the game, but I'm kind of excited to finally get these. For a long time, Final Fantasy XI players asked for these specific armor sets, even if within 11, they're really just kind of reskins, updated designs, sort of, for existing pieces of gear. Not to mention that recently, Final Fantasy XI has actually been adding these sets in, so it's kind of funny that 14 is adding them in right as 11 has, over 20 years after the fact, finally decided to do the same. But who are these tall, pale characters clad in black, and why are 11 players making such a big deal about them? Well, in this video, I'll be giving you a history lesson on these 5, the location they're from, as well as their most known attacks. The Archangels were introduced in Final Fantasy XI as part of the Rise of Xylart expansion. This expansion released prior to the game's global release and thus was included with all copies of the game when it did leave Japan. The events of this story take place directly after defeating the Shadow Lord in the base game story, which I've detailed plenty in the Shadow Lord video itself. In essence, the Archangels are the physical embodiments of the curses laid upon each of the enlightened races by Promethea in ages past. The Hume's apathy, the Tarutaru's cowardice, the Mithra's envy, the Elvan's arrogance, and the Gulka's rage. Each of these beings are summoned forth from the 5 mother crystals themselves by the Xylardian prince Ealdnark with the help of his younger brother Camlanot. These 5, also known as the Crystal Warriors, immediately took to dispatching the adventurer and his allies before being saved by the Shadow Lord, who had regained his senses. Again, see my Shadow Lord video to get the full story. From this point on, they serve little purpose other than slowing down the adventurer and their allies as they progress through the Xylart story. They surround and attack the party while the adventurer deals with Camlanot in the Delkfoot Tower, before acting as guardians meant to stop any advancement towards Ealdnark in the Ruan Gardens. Ruan Gardens and the battlefield where the Archangels are encountered, the Leyloff Amphitheater, are both featured in the 7.1 trailer as well. This entire region, known simply as Sky to the Final Fantasy XI community, is an endgame area featuring several powerful bosses, but most importantly, the mighty gods Byakko, Seiryu, Genbu, Suzaku, and of course, Kirin. This means that as actual characters, the group has very little in terms of character development or even plot relevance. They were largely meant to act as a large wall for the player to overcome in order to finish the Rise of Xylart story. The player was given 2 options in terms to advance the story. The first was to find and defeat each of the Archangels individually, bringing a smaller group to do battle with each of them. This was the most straightforward method of getting to Ealdnark and finishing the story. The second option was an optional quest to unlock a battle against all 5 Archangels at once. The battlefield, known as Divine Might, required an incredibly specific item to gain access called an Arc Pentasphere. To obtain it, the player had to bring the Illuminink and Parchment items to a specific spring in Romave, a zone that led to the Ruan Gardens. Once there, they need to trade the items to the spring. However, it also had to be a full moon, nighttime, and a clear sky. At least back in the day, you actually don't need the clear sky anymore. This actually causes the spring to light up, at which point the items can actually be traded and the Pentasphere obtained. This meant there were only a few potential night cycles per real-life week where the item was even obtainable. Fortunately, only one person needed to have an Arc Pentasphere, though everyone needed to have the quest active. Players wishing to repeat the quest after defeating it the first time and dropping their initial reward, which was done to get a different reward, must also obtain a Moonlight Ore by trading a Light Ore to the same fountain during the full moon. This simply allows them to earn a new reward after completing it again. This battlefield also allowed up to 18 players to participate. players would either try to instantly kill all 5 Archangels with a ton of Black Mages coordinating an AoE nuke on them before they could retaliate, or attempt to split them all up and tackle them one at a time. Either way, it often ended in failure due to the overwhelming power of each of the individual angels, not to mention all 5 at once. So what did each of the Archangels even do? What made them as tough as they were? While they all often used some attacks that the player themselves could use, such as weapon skills and powerful abilities known as 2 hours, called as such because that was their cooldown for the player, each of their skill sets actually at least attempts to represent their specific vice. Archangel Tarutaru mostly focuses on cowardly gameplay styles. As a Black Mage and Dark Knight, he often teleports around the arena, running from the player as he attempts to cast powerful spells. This cowardice is temporarily overcome when utilizing the Dark Knight 2-hour blood weapon, though this is meant to heal him up before he returns to teleporting around. He also loves crowd-controlling enemies with sleep and other debilitating effects, none more dangerous than his Amon Drive weapon skill. This attack not only does AoE damage, but also paralyzes and petrifies any affected. Archangel Mithra embodies her envy largely through her Beastmaster job. She's capable of charming her current target, even if she still has a pet alive, making that player fight for her for a short time. Her Thief job also allows her to perfectly evade physical attacks for a short time, while her Havoc Spiral weapon skill does high damage while applying sleep and heavy on any hit. Archangel Galka channels his rage through his insane aggression patterns. As a samurai and dragoon, he constantly punishes the player he's attacking, spamming weapon skills through his Mekyo Shisui ability. This can cause skill chains, and he can even spam his Dragon Fall jump skill, which does massive AoE damage and binds any targets hit in place. Oh, and he does have a little wyvern buddy to help out. Archangel Elvon displays her arrogance in her overwhelming survivability. She is a paladin and a white mage, giving her access to both Invincible, what Final Fantasy XIV players know as Hallowed Ground, and Benediction, so a 30-second physical invulnerability on top of the ability to heal back to full sure makes her troublesome on its own. Her signature attack is supposed to be Dominion Slash, which not only does massive AoE damage and silences, but can also strip buffs off the player as well. However, that's not what she's most known for. Most fear her use of the paladin weapon skill Spirits Within. The player's version scales with health and deals more damage when at higher health. And given that Archangel Elvon has a lot more health than you do, hers can do thousands of points of damage to the player she hits, instantly killing them. This makes Benediction even more threatening, as it brings her health back up to full and gives her more chances to one-shot whoever she's hitting. Finally, Archangel Hume's apathy isn't actually too strongly embodied, although I kind of have a funny thing that I'm sure isn't intended for it. He's a ninja and a warrior, which is by far the most standard job combo of all of the Archangels, and can use Mighty Strikes to ensure all of his physical attacks are crits. His Crossreaver Conal can do really high damage and stun, but his most threatening attack is the Ninja 2-hour Mijin Gakure. When the player uses this skill, it acts as a self-destruct, killing the player and dealing damage to the target based on the player's health at that time. Higher health means higher damage. Well, in case you didn't learn what happened with Archangel Elvon, the Hume's Mijin Gakure does indeed cause him to explode and deal massive AoE damage to everybody he hits, which can often one-shot, if not, well, it can one-shot several people, but it can also just completely wipe the entire team. However, his doesn't actually kill him. He lays on the ground briefly and then just gets back up. And if apathy is supposed to be laziness, I mean, I guess him just laying down is as close as you really get to that. None of his other skills really embody apathy very well. These 5 built their reputation on their difficulty, barring players from completing the story or earning the Divine Might reward. Nowadays, there are even harder versions of them. There's the level 99 versions, which can be fought from the very easy to very hard difficulty, as well as a higher level version of Divine Might with the same difficulty options. There's even what's called a master trial called Crystal Paradise, where a group of only 6 players must not only tackle all 5 Archangels at the same time, but also the Xylart brothers Ealdnark and Camlanot, earning a level 1 glam weapon if you manage to defeat it, the Hedron Dagger. So while these characters do have some story involvement and definitely have a lore background that can actually be quite branching when you get into the original Curse of Prometheus, something I covered a little bit in the Prish video, as actual characters, that's not why they're really known. They're kind of cool looking, they're dark, they're gritty, they're edgy, to say the least, and they just have a reputation for being player killers. Now, do I expect that to happen in the Final Fantasy XI raid in Final Fantasy XIV? Not that much. We have been told that compared to the previous expansion's 24-man raids, that this one will be a little bit more difficult. It's expected that most groups on week 1 will probably wipe a handful of times before they're able to clear the entire thing. And the Archangels could very well be a place where we see that. We also know that we're going to be seeing some more Final Fantasy XIV-esque skills from these characters in that raid. We can see Archangel Elvon using the Paladin Wings skill, as well as the Black Mage dropping a meteor out of the sky, which is very much the Final Fantasy XIV style of meteor and not the 11 style one, which would result in disaster. That being said, their reputation and their appearance have carried them for decades now as popular characters, and we expect that to continue to be the case as they're introduced into Final Fantasy XIV, albeit not quite to the same level. And that's going to be a wrap for my video on the Archangels of Final Fantasy XI. Be sure to comment below if you have your own stories in regards to the Final Fantasy XI days of this character. Your first defeat of any of these individually, your attempts at Divine Might, your failures, whatever. Most Final Fantasy XI players really remember the times where they got their skulls kicked in, and not so much about their clutch wins. Although usually the clutch wins are because of their skulls being kicked in and just barely surviving, so I guess they do kind of come hand in hand. But anyway, be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more videos on Final Fantasy XI lore, especially in regards to stuff we see in the Final Fantasy XIV raid. But anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.